Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump announces a travel ban for 12 countries to keep America safe. China's Xi Jinping holds a telephone call with the US president following months of trade war threats. Meanwhile, the German Chancellor arrives at the White House for his first in-person meeting with Donald Trump. And the US Defense Secretary puts pressure on NATO allies to commit to an increase in defense spending. Now to our top story, and President Trump has announced 12 countries who will be banned from travelling to the United States. Afghanistan, Haiti and Iran are included on the list, with 7 other countries like Cuba and Venezuela facing partial restrictions. The ban comes into force on the 9th of June. Here's a reminder of how the US president broke the news.
In my first term, my powerful travel restrictions were one of our most successful policies, and they were a key part of preventing major foreign terror attacks on American soil. We will not let what happened in Europe happen to America. Very simply, we cannot have open migration from any country where we cannot safely and reliably vet and screen those who seek to enter the United States. That is why today I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others. The list is subject to revision based on whether material improvements are made, and likewise new countries can be added as threats emerge around the world. But we will not allow people to enter our country who wish to do us harm, and nothing will stop us from keeping America safe.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, and Tala Michel Issa, the chief reporter at Arabian Business. Thank you so much for both joining me this evening. Much appreciated. Shane, I'm going to start with you. We just saw Donald Trump there announcing this travel ban. First, just explain exactly what this travel ban is and why does it matter?
Okay, so there's the 12 countries. He didn't mention them all there himself, surprisingly, but it's Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and Yemen. So there's not really too many surprises there, I would think. But the 7 partial restricted are Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan and Venezuela. So that's all the admin done. But I would say it's June 9th, as you said, when it comes in, which is 4 days, and 4 days on Planet Trump can be quite a long time. So let's wait and see what happens in the next couple of days. But in the reasons that he said that these countries have been picked, and he said that we don't want people who are coming to harm us. So it's to do with countries that have a large scale, they've said, presence of terrorists. It's those who failed to cooperate on visa security, have an inability to verify travelers' identity, have bad record keeping on criminal histories, and also have high overstays. So I think those 5 things are quite fair enough to, if countries are not adhering to that, then you don't get in. But I think in a lot of these sort of Trumpian sort of negotiations, it's a kind of you go high and then that brings them to the table. So I think in the next 4 days you're going to see all of these countries phoning up the White House and looking to negotiate to sort of dilute down some of these restrictions that have been put on. But at the same time, it should say, like, this is not a blanket ban on everyone. So if you're worried about like how the World Cup's going to be impacted when it's in America, athletes who are attending sports events or footballers, if any of these countries qualify, which I'm not a football expert, I don't know if these are good sporting nations, they will be allowed to come, as well as diplomats. And also what I thought was really interesting is those who suffer ethnic and religious minorities that face persecution in Iran, which is quite specific.
Yes.
So there is a lot of detail in this that he didn't go into, which if you dig down into it. But like I said, it's 4 days to go, so these countries will be on the phone very quickly to the White House to try and sort this out.
And actually, when I had a look at the ban too, because obviously there was one brought in 2017 to lots of criticism, it was almost rushed in many respects. This one seemed to have a lot of exemptions in it, and it also seemed to be a little bit more watertight than the previous one, so maybe they've learned from mistakes, Tala. But critics are calling this actually a return to the so-called Muslim ban.
I mean, look, in its DNA, it's quite similar in the way that it's obviously banning people from quite a few countries from visiting the US. But in 2017, there were 7 Muslim majority countries included. And now we're seeing the likes of African countries like, Eritrea as well included there. So obviously there has been a change in the way this has happened. But at the same time, Shane, do you want to say something?
Well,
Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
I think the one thing I do think, if you're kind of like flip it on its side, is that this is a mandate that President Trump was elected on. So this is what he always said he was going to do. So it's not a major surprise, and it's his voting base. This is what they want, and immigration is a massive policy for him.
And there's something else that I was actually just thinking about when I saw this travel ban announced, and something Angie Wong I spoke to earlier in the show, my previous show, mentioned to me, and she was saying that, you mentioned the timing, but there has been domestic terror in the US, and we can't deny that. We've seen that, and Donald Trump actually referenced that when he brought in this travel ban, even though Egypt wasn't on the travel ban, where the person accused in the Colorado attacks is said to be from. But I wonder if there's also domestic pressure, one, to deliver, and two, to crack down on migration, like he said he was going to do.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, he is basically, I guess, trying to deliver on a campaign promise. I mean, he did say he's reinforcing the stance of America first. But yeah, definitely, like you said, the timing of the Colorado attack this week really puts it into perspective. And yeah.
But also as well, like you mentioned before, and this is not a new policy, so it's not going to have the shock value, I think, of 2017. And even by the end of this show, the Trump universe moves really, really fast. So there'll be another headline. He's meeting with China. So I think it's not going to be the huge sort of attention-grabbing way that it was back in. I remember in 2017.
Yes.
This was like absolutely shocking.
And you remember the airports? There was people
protests.
who couldn't get onto planes. There was protests across America. It was a very different look to what we're seeing now.
Yeah. And also, like this, remember the Supreme Court did bring in a watered-down version of it. So this probably will go forward as well. But then, if you remember, then Biden stripped it away again and said it was a stain on national conscience. So it depends how long this all takes to come in. Remember, a president is only 4 years, and that Trump can't go a third time. So if a Democrat president comes in next time, they could scrap this again. So it's a bit of a flip-flop back and forth. But I definitely think it's going to bring all of these countries to the table, because if you look at all of these, if I do my math, 19 countries, they're going to have tariffs put on them. Now they can't travel. So it's a real setback in terms of this. And you noticed in the clip that he said more countries will be added. And I noticed that there was a Reuters report in March saying there was potentially 41 countries on a potential list that the White House has. And this is the first sort of batch. So, it's kind of like saying to all countries that don't have their visa processing applications, and or if you're overstaying, you're welcome in the US in terms of visa. It's kind of get your paperwork together.
And then I think also, if we look around the world at different governments, immigration's such a hot topic. So maybe, we're looking at this as something from a different optics globally at the moment. But I also just going to bring you up to speed with another conversation I had. And President Trump has posted on Truth Social that China and the US have now reached a trade deal after a long phone call between the two leaders. Earlier, I spoke to Miami GOP committee women Angie Wong about the developments. Take a listen.
This is the news that we've all been waiting for the two presidents to have that phone call and to work out a trade deal. And President Trump loves this because he loves that he can pick up a phone and call President Xi to work this out. And now the U.S. markets have responded very favorably. We're in the green. And I think now it's been a sigh of relief for a lot of investors as well as business owners who weren't really sure what was going on. We still had freight hanging around the Pacific Ocean, not knowing whether or not it should dock on U.S. soil due to these trade tariffs that were put onto place. So now that we know that there's been a long phone call, it's been very favorable, very positive, as President Trump put on Truth Social, and with the added bonus that the Chinese president invited the First Lady and the president to his home country and vice versa. I mean, these are all great signs.
Shane, great signs between China and the US. I guess really positive signals coming out of that meeting on the phone between Trump and Xi. I feel like we've been talking about this meeting happening and waiting for it to happen. It's happened. What a turnaround and for both of these two leaders.
We'll wait now. We don't know all the details yet, but the markets have reacted like relatively positively. They haven't gone like dam busters, and oil has been up. Unfortunately, gold is down, which I'm very sad about because I bought gold. But what can you do? And that shows that the safe haven status of gold. People are moving away from that, so they're feeling that this deal has legs, and there's a lot going to come from it in terms of the market and the economists. So I think this is something to get optimistic about. I really hope it goes through, because if China and the US can sort out their tariff issue and trade deal, then it'll trickle down to the rest of the world.
And like Angie said to me, Tala, there's been ships just not able to dock because they don't know right now what import duties are on or where both the countries stand when it comes to tariffs on each other. And that would have put huge pressure on consumers from both countries. So what did you make about today's announcement?
I mean, it's too early to say, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, I guess, in light of what happened, I guess, with the tariffs. And of course, in his last presidency, you had the US-China trade war. So, yeah, I think it's too early for me to maybe say anything, but let's see how this plays out. Trying to be cautiously optimistic myself.
No, definitely. And like we said there, actually, what I thought was interesting was when he was asked about this meeting in the Oval Office, when he was meeting the German Chancellor. He's had a really busy day, Donald Trump. He said, they asked him, he said she will be coming here to meet him and Melania. They've been invited to China. And then he also said, Chinese students are coming. No problem, which is a little bit of a change around from what we've heard because of the situation happening legally with Harvard University. And then he said, I'm honored to have Chinese students. So it seems to be like maybe there has been a little bit of diplomacy in that phone call, but that's just my speculation.
No, it definitely is a switch around, because I saw there was the massive headline in Bloomberg yesterday saying that Trump was saying that that China was difficult to deal with. So I think he's possibly met his match. And to put it into context, like anyone who's watching who's got a smartphone and a flat screen TV or wants to buy one, coming up for the end of the year, the sales, a lot of those need rare earth minerals, which come from China. So if China decides to pull those, then your smartphone and your flat screen TV are going to be in jeopardy. So, Trump, knows his base. He knows what they like. So this is part of the practical negotiations that goes into these kind of talks.
And of course, when things were heating up, earlier between China and the US over the tariffs, China paused that critical minerals exportation.
So it's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected in many ways. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. It's super interesting. Now, the German Chancellor has arrived at the White House for his first in-person meeting with President Trump. Ahead of the meeting, Mertz said he was looking forward to speaking to the US president, pointing to their very good relationship so far. Here's what they had to say inside the Oval Office earlier.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to meet because I've been dealing with the Chancellor, and he's a very good man to deal with. He's difficult, I would say. Can I say that? It's a positive.
Go ahead.
You wouldn't want me to say you're easy, right?
No.
Yeah, he's a very great representative of Germany. I think all we want is just going to have a good relationship. The rest will just sort of follow very easily. We'll have a good trade deal. I mean, I guess that will be mostly determined by the European Union, but you're a very big part of that, so you'll be involved. But we'll end up hopefully with a trade deal, or we'll do something, you know, we'll do the tariffs. I mean, I'm okay with the tariffs, or we make a deal with the trade, and I guess that's what we're discussing now.
Yeah.
Earlier, I spoke to Berlin-based journalist James Jackson about his thoughts on Mertz and Trump meeting today. Take a listen.
I think you can see that there's immediately a much better rapport between Donald Trump, president, and Chancellor Friedrich Merz than there was between Trump and his predecessor and long-term rival Angela Merkel. So Merz and Merkel had a long-term rivalry going back decades, and she kind of shoved him out of the way to become leader of the CDU way back in the early 2000s. And Trump never liked Angela Merkel. She was seen as opposing him from Europe, not spending enough on defense. So Friedrich Merz has come in as a conservative who speaks English, who actually met Trump through the corporate world in the 80s, much more of a transatlanticist than Merkel ever was. And I have to say, I think Friedrich Merz did a really good job today because he really played to his strengths, speaking fluent English, which was, complimented by the president, as well as using his kind of, there were a few tricky questions in there. They asked if he agreed with Trump's metaphor about Ukraine and Russia being like two children fighting. Well, Mertz can't agree with that because, of course, he thinks and knows that Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine. It's not about two children fighting. But instead, he just said what we agree on. He praised Trump many times. So there was a bit of a love-in. But I will say, from Germany's perspective, there were a lot of very awkward comments in there. It was never hostile, but he did quote General MacArthur saying, never let the Germans rearm. Oh, but I don't know. I think we should let them rearm. He also talked about D-Day, which Mertz brought up as a positive thing, the invasion of the US and the UK invading France to defeat the Nazis. Of course, in modern Germany, that's seen as a positive thing. They say we were liberated from the Nazis. And Trump asks, is that a good thing? And really, that's going to be very awkward for Mertz. But I think he did a terrific job of ignoring the awkward parts, warming up the president. Question is, will that have any effect?
Now, US Secretary of State Pete Hegseth is in Brussels today attending meetings with his NATO counterparts. The US has called on NATO allies to spend 5% of their GDP on defence, above the current target of 2%. Speaking to reporters, Hegseth said he felt confident that members of the alliance would agree to boost in spending ahead of the NATO summit later this month. Take a listen.
To be an alliance, you got to be more than flags. You got to be formations. You got to be more than conferences. You need to be combat-ready capabilities. So we're here to continue the work that President Trump started, which is a commitment to 5% defense spending across this alliance, which we think will happen, which we think has to happen by the summit at The Hague later this month.
And there he is, the all-American Pete Hegseth. Shane, let's put that out there before we go any further. But the US, really exactly what Hegseth was saying there, they've absolutely doubled down on 5% defense spending for NATO members.
Yeah.
So he says the allies, Hegseth, they've got to step up. Right now, is this demand realistic? 5%, how realistic is that, considering the base we're starting from? 2% is the target right now.
Well, I think he definitely thinks it's realistic, and he says they have to step up. They don't have to at all. This is a negotiation. So I think if you look first, and your guest on your earlier show made a good point that the 5% when you break it down, so it's 3.5% is guns and military and all the hard military, and the other 1% is sort of upgrading your infrastructure, so airports, drones or whatever, or better bridges and coast guards and all that kind of thing. So it's not all just sort of hard weaponry in that regard. But it's kind of what everybody focuses on. And in the same way that everybody was focusing on, like if you look at the US, they're roughly about 3.5%.
Yeah.
So they're not even sort of meeting their own target, which leads me to believe that when you say is 5% realistic, I think it's what the starting point is when you go into the negotiation. So I think they probably want to get it to maybe 3.5 up from 2 or maybe 4. So there's leg room for, you know, for a margin to come down, which is basic negotiation. So I don't think the 5% is going to happen. I think they may agree something slightly lower.
And also what I found interesting when I was speaking to Jim Townsend, who you referenced earlier on my first show, I thought it was interesting that he said no timeline was exactly given for this. So, you know, NATO countries to meet that headline figure of 5%, but over how many years will it be? So are we saying, okay, 20 years? Are we saying 10 years? So I think that's something that at the next NATO meeting will probably be more discussed. But I think, like you said, it's quite interesting headline figure, which will be split into hardware and into sort of the basic maintenance of things. But what happens if NATO countries just think, you know what, we can't fulfill this right now. We don't have the money. You know, we're not the world's biggest economy like the US is. Realistically, there's much smaller countries who are NATO members. Will the US withdraw more support from Ukraine, or could they possibly just leave NATO altogether?
Honestly, I don't really see the US leaving NATO altogether, but definitely if this commitment is not met, or whatever commitment they decide to settle on, which is probably halfway through. We know Trump's deal-making style. You always go for the absolute extreme, and then eventually you want to settle for somewhere in the middle. So 3% maybe. But I could definitely see the US potentially scaling back their support for Ukraine if this target is not met. But that's also going to depend on the timeline as well. Like you mentioned earlier, it could be within 10 years, it could be within 20 years. But definitely my view is if it's in the short term, it's definitely not realistic.
And I think that's also another problem, isn't it? Because basically Europe is dealing with an aggressive Russia in many respects. So if we're not stepping up the volume of defence, are we on a war footing? Are we war prepared? I think this is what Pete Hegsth and America are trying to get across.
But also in some respects you could kind of see he's the head of the Pentagon, and you know he's also, you know, you could see him as, you know, chief sort of military salesperson for the US, because the US is the biggest supplier of weapons to the rest of the world. So if everyone agrees to 5% and they go and buy weapons, where are they going to buy it from?
America. I know that is a way to look at it, but I also think that it's just this increased frustration. Because you remember the Signal Gate happened, where there were leaked messages, and Pete Hegsth...
Yeah, so you're thinking you should wait to get added to the NATO WhatsApp group?
No, not to add it to the NATO WhatsApp group, but they have gone for Europe, and they're saying, listen, we have had your back all this time. We've been spending on defence. We can't constantly keep on coming to your aid. So in some ways, it's a fair enough argument.
Look, it is, but I think if this 5% is applied progressively, because if you look at each individual economy within the NATO member states, I mean, not everyone can actually fulfill this target, because that would eventually mean cutting back on certain public spending, which could cause domestic issues eventually. So.
Yeah, I would disagree with you on that point more than slightly, really, because the way I look at it is that, you know, with the superpowers in the world, you've got Russia on one side, and you've basically, well, we've now got China as well, so there's basically 3. But I think if Russia decides to expand its borders, then America can't just let it do that if it feels like, and we've, you know, it's already shown that it's willing to do that. So to keep the balance of power of the superpowers, it's in America's interest as well to support its allies that are geographically closer to Russia. So I think it has to continue to support its NATO allies, but I think it's just the transactional relationship that Trump has with these countries, and he's always said that he wanted them to increase more on defence. And I think, you know, obviously it is a bit more of a precarious which is an understatement, situation when you look at what's happening around the world in everywhere from Ukraine to Gaza to, India, Pakistan, you could look at Taiwan and China. So there's a lot going on in the world. So there's a lot to justify spending more on defense at this time. So the theory and what Trump was saying back in 2017 now has a lot more weight behind it, I would say.
It's okay if you disagree with what I
right.
have asked you. I'm more than happy for you to come back to me. And that is a really good point, isn't it? It's within America's interest to protect its allies,
to keep the balance of power.
To keep the balance of power going, which is very true. But you just touched on something which I thought was interesting, is where the country is going to get this money from. Because we saw the UK, they said, right, we are spending, I think the UK spends 2.3% of GDP on defence last year, which is 2024, but that's above the NATO 2% threshold at the moment. But they've said we're going to increase that to 3.5%, but that will be over a 10-year period. And we've seen money being cut from the foreign aid budget to fulfil that gap. And I wonder if we're going to find more and more countries, Tala, in this position.
I think we might, honestly, but I do see Shane's point in that obviously we are in a time where people need to get, governments need to get very serious about their defense spending.
No, absolutely. And amazingly, actually, when I had a look at the NATO members, the person in NATO, the country which spends the most on defense, is Poland.
By percentage, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, by percentage. So by percentage, they spend 3.5%. That's even more than the US. But that's because they're on a border with Russia.
Yeah, exactly.
So
they're very close.
But they have stepped up. So there's lots of different figures flying around, but really interesting conversation. Thank you so much. Now, Iran has criticised a proposal from the US surrounding a new nuclear agreement, maintaining Tehran will not stop enriching uranium. The US reportedly demanded a complete halt in exchange for the lifting of sanctions. But Iran's supreme leader says the US proposal contradicts his nation's belief in self-reliance. Earlier, I spoke to Director of Political Sciences at USJ, Dr. Sami Nada, about his thoughts on this very issue.
The main sticking point is the question of enrichment that Iran consider uranium enrichment that Iran consider as its fundamental right, while it's not clear that the U.S. is allowing or accepting Iran to enrich inside Iran. The idea or the proposal that has been floating is that the enrichment would take place under the auspices of a consortium and most likely outside Iran, which Iran consider as a non-starter. Its right of enrichment, it consider this should not be a subject to negotiation. However, one positive thing is the negotiations are still going on, maybe because both parties needs a deal. Neither one wants the negotiations to fail. Iran badly needs the lifting of sanctions, in addition to the fact that its military capability have been seriously degraded after the Gaza war, namely its proxies in the region have been either decapitated or diminished. So its negotiation position has been degraded. While the U.S., its priority is to settle this issue, it has other priorities, whether containing China, the rising of China, or dealing with the crisis in Ukraine, in addition to the economic situation inside America and the war in tariffs that the administration Trump is dealing with. So both parties are needs these deals, but a lot of uncertainties are still hovering. I mean, and mainly what will be the behavior of or the strategy of Israel if Israel sees that a deal is closed, but it deals with does not meet Israel requirement that from day one they are talking about something similar to the Libya scenario, meaning that all Iran nuclear capabilities should be dismantled. And once more, this is a non-starter for the Iranian.
Now, moving on to another story, a video posted by Meghan Markle showing her dancing with Prince Harry whilst heavily pregnant in a hospital room has gone viral. She posted it to celebrate their daughter, Princess Lilibeth's 4th birthday. The video has sparked mixed reactions online. Let's just take a quick look at it.
Baby mamas, this shot song been pregnant for way too long. I tell the DJ turn it off.
If she a baby mama,
Go ahead.
she gon' do that baby mama.
Work.
She gon' put it on you. She gon' do that baby mama. Drop,
Drop it down, drop it down, down low.
drop,
Drop it down, drop it down, down low.
drop,
Drop it down, drop it down, down low. Do the baby mama when I step out on the floor. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, oh, hit the baby mama when I step into the door.
I mean, Tala, I don't know why. It's kind of, it's a bit crazy, and I don't know, what do you make of it?
Firstly, the video's too long.
It's too long.
Yes, I think it was very difficult to watch this labor-inducing dance, let's just call it. But look, I mean, on a more serious note, they're a couple. They're just normal human beings. They had a very fun private moment, although it was obviously what looked like a difficult labor. I just think it was kind of sweet.
I agree. It was kind of like a real personal moment between a couple having... I think Lilibeth is the, I don't know if she's the first or second child, I probably should know that. But anyway, moving on. Shane, you know, I don't know, but are we at a time where everything that Harry and Meghan do or make or post online is just so heavily criticised?
Yes, I would say we probably are. And a lot of that is to do with because they sued some major media organisations. So. And they're not going to like them, and they're going to, they're going to be out to get a scalp for them both. But I would disagree in that they're not a normal couple. They're HRH. We've seen them use that. They're a Duke and Duchess, so they're not a normal couple by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it's unfair to sort of criticise. I thought it was a fun video. I'd only seen a small clip that I didn't realise it was that extensive, as they say. But I think this is not just an accidental little thing that slipped off her phone onto the Tinterweb or whatever you want to. This is like a strategic move. Everything these kind of people at this level of celebrity is done strategic. And if you look at, only days ago it was announced that they've hired a brand new communications and PR team who have experience at sort of like Hulu and Netflix and are entertainment focused. They're, as opposed to the royals generally would have private secretaries who've sort of dealt with monarchies. So I think the strategy is probably because I think the cookery show that I saw a clip of that Meghan did, it kind of was seen as a little bit sort of preachy, and it didn't have the effect, it didn't have the Martha Stewart effect that she was probably hoping for. So I think they want to represent them as more of a fun couple. They're exciting, they're quite young, they're quite cool. They're doing this sort of fun dancing. So I think this is a very strategic move on their behalf to try and inject some sort of fun into the narrative around them.
That's interesting. You say that they've got like a new press team or comms team. Because I must admit, when I first watched this, Tala, I don't know if you're going to agree with me, but I was like, wow, fighting for privacy, taking newspapers to court, and then your private life, one of the most intimate moments on your private life is now being viewed by the world. I mean, you can't have both of it, can you? You can't have the HRH royal title and you can't have privacy and you can't be a celebrity. It's just all too much, and I think that's what a lot of people are saying.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I do agree. I think I was actually thinking about this while Shane was speaking. They, for so long, have said, we want privacy, the press is after us, and then, of course, the court cases. And now they're sharing what looks like an extremely, very, very, very private moment online, but that could be due to their new comms team. So pretty interesting stuff.
But I think it's something that they need to do at the moment, because I looked up a couple, I asked the interweb how popular are they, and it's very interesting that in Britain they're very unpopular, extremely, down around the 20% mark. The only person who's more unpopular is Prince Andrew, which is a whole other show. And then, but if you look in America, it's quite a different story.
Really?
Harry is actually quite popular. He's more popular than Catherine, which I thought was very surprising. And this was only done weeks ago. And Meghan is still sort of quite unpopular, but she's not as unpopular as she is in the UK. So I think they're probably targeting this at the US market and to position them as sort of a hybrid of royalty/celebrity.
Which I think is so interesting, because we do know that Meghan and Harry have really slipped down in the ratings of royal family likes over in the UK. So at least Harry's still not lost all the love. And I must say, Shane always brings us some stats, which we love. We can't ever get away from the polls. No, but the stats man. But again, I just feel a little bit like, image is so important. And once your brand is damaged, Tala, is there any coming back from it? I don't know what you both think about that. But did you watch the cookery show with Love Meghan?
Unfortunately, I didn't. I did not.
Fortunately, I did. Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Did you watch it?
I did. Yeah. I watched the first probably 10 minutes of the first episode.
Can I ask you, where's our jam? Where's our edible flowers?
Well, I didn't get it, so I can't. You don't get it just by watching the show, and I didn't order it online.
Oh, you didn't?
So, and I hear it's not going to be stocked up. So unfortunately, we'll just have to wait and see. But I think it's generally they want to be seen as fun, because they've had so much negativity. Like the interview that Harry did after, I think it was on the BBC after the court case, was very, very negative. So I think they need to turn it around. And like I said, he's still well liked in America. So I think it's appealing. This is for the American market. It's not to appease the Brits that already really, really don't like them still.
Trying to be more relatable, I guess.
And quick thought, Tala, on the conspiracy theories.
Yes, I was about to bring that up. Are you referring to the fake baby bump?
Was she ever really pregnant, is a question a lot of people are asking on the internet.
Look, the conspiracy theory images that emerged are very convincing. Mm-hmm. But I still do think she was pregnant. I don't know why. I think it's an intuition.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I don't think you could fake that.
No, and I think that, like we said, this is what online breeds, doesn't it? And especially if you are becoming really polarized people, leaving the royal family, moving into the celebrity world, doing interviews with Oprah Winfrey, doing with the BBC, you're going to put yourself out there for criticism. But I quite like the dad and mum dancing. I thought, why not? It's quite sweet.
Maybe she'll be on Dancing with the Stars next.
Oh, yeah, she could be on Dancing with the Stars next. You heard it here first.
Yeah, let's start spreading that rumour here.
Yeah, we will. And finally, we've reached that point in the show where Shane and Tala, you've come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. Shane, let's start with yours. The iconic Greggs sausage roll has made it to a famous museum in London. What more do we know about this?
Right. So the famous museum is Madame Tussauds, which I think is known globally. There's sites all over the world. I don't know if Greggs is known globally. It's very popular in the UK. When I was there recently in Scotland, it was the only store on the high street that had queues all the way out the door. So I think it's extremely, extremely popular. So it's interesting that Madame Tussauds, and there's even a branch in Dubai, and there's all over the world, as I said. They're moving into this sort of area. I think it's probably like a marketing gimmick. Look, we're talking about it right now, so it's worked. So they've put a sausage roll, a wax version of it. And it's interesting to see if they're going to continue to do this in all of the museums. Is the German one going to have I can't think of a German piece of food now right now.
Schnitzel.
There you go. There you go. I would personally like to see a nice cup of tea in the corner and a
Shane,
full English
you
breakfast.
Be more creative than that.
Well, what would you want then?
I don't know.
There you go.
You're from Ireland.
Well, yeah, there's debate
A
over.
4-leaf clover.
It's three-leaf.
3-leaf clover. Okay, maybe I should just leave this conversation where it is. But it's quite.
But yeah, I see your point. And,
Yeah.
and like even the comical element to it was that they were also asked about which people are going to go in the museum, and Keir Starmer is not making the cut. So Greg's, with all its popularity, is getting in there, but the Prime Minister of the actual country is not getting in because they said they only put people in that will be popular and relevant to the public for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's quite an indicting thing that they've said Keir Starmer might not be popular for 5 to 10 years.
Well, I must tell you something, Tala. You lived in the UK, I lived in the UK too, and now the Greggs sausage roll is an icon. All I just want to say is the one thing I miss on the Saturday morning is going to the gym and walking into Greggs and getting a vegan sausage roll. It's life-changing, Greggs, isn't it, for a lot of people?
It really is. I actually lived in the northeast of England. I lived in Newcastle. And there were so many Greggses, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but so many of them just in the city centre. There was one street that had 2 Greggs opposite each other. And it was a one-way street or two lane or something, but yeah, they ended up closing one of them down. It was so popular there, but I think if I could
put something in the museum
that's extremely British, I would say Marmite.
Oh.
People have very strong feelings about Marmite, so maybe
I love
that's a good idea, I think.
I know you shouldn't really use AI, but I did ask ChatGPT what would you put in the museum just to see what they would say for a bit of a giggle. And they suggest, which I think is a great idea, because there's nothing more British than a queue, so all the waxwork should be put in a queue.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Right, I like that.
That's quite a good idea. I learned how to queue when I moved to England because before that, it did not impress me on any level. And Tala, we're going to go to yours quickly because yours is actually a story that I love because it's about my favourite animals, and that's elephants. And an elephant raided a grocery store, but I hope not for the sausage rolls.
No, for some sandwiches and sweet rice crackers and some dried bananas, apparently.
And this was in Thailand, right? So
Yes.
they went into the supermarket in Thailand. I love this story because also in Thailand, they're really trying to protect the elephants now. It's become something that's quite topical and top of the agenda in the country. So wild elephant on the loose in a supermarket. And I like the fact that he had 9 bags of sweets. Can you imagine the energy after 9 bags of sweets?
Must have been hungry.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a hyperactive elephant running around?
No, I can't.
No, you don't.
I mean, maybe I like the fact he also had some dried bananas, so one of the 5 a day at least in the supermarket.
I think it's quite sad though that the reason he was probably in there is because their habitat is being diminished and due to poaching and climate change. It's probably climate change, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really
And
good
people
point.
as well, probably.
Yeah. So no, actually, that is very true.
It is, yeah.
So
It's quite sad, yeah.
it's not all fun and games. Oh, we hope the elephant is okay. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Thanks to today's guest, Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, and Tala Michel Issa, chief reporter at Arabian Business. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. G&T is coming up next with Tom Burgess-Watson. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.